just broadly speaking, again, the landscape of private equity, over the years, is there any trends to where we are now and any insights as to where private equity is heading in the future? Is it, whether it's the number of firms, the types of firms, anything you see there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of changes, particularly over the last decade or so. Number one, there's been massive growth in terms of assets coming into the private space.
Mm,
Now, there might be many sort of big picture reasons why that's the case. And it could be the case that firms no longer want to go public or stay public because, the regulatory requirements can be burdensome, particularly for small companies. It's costly to, you know, put out, quarterly filings and SEC filings, that is, right?
sure.
And so there's been massive growth in terms of investors who want to invest in private markets in terms of providing the supply of capital, as well as businesses who prefer to stay private for longer, right? So the demand for capital is there.
Hmm.
Other evolutions include the broader access that we were talking about, particularly to retail and high net worth individuals like interval funds, BDCs, or even platforms that kind of open the door for retail investors, secondary markets too, right?
Hmm.
You're seeing a lot longer horizon on some of these funds. You know how I said that sometimes it's like 10 years?
Right.
Well, there's been a huge increase in what are called continuation funds. Right. So if you have a fund that's run by Apollo and they have like five businesses in there that they really still like, but don't want to sell, or there's not a buyer willing to pay the price that they're looking for,
Hmm.
well, they might launch a new fund and put those businesses in that fund to create liquidity for the existing investors, right?
Hmm.
So those are continuation funds. So you've seen a lot more of that, which, I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. And, typically you want to keep the good ones, right?
Right. Right.
and pay off the investors in the meantime. You're seeing a fair bit more in terms of not not just growth in terms of assets under management, but here's an interesting sort of big picture perspective is that, 20, 30 years ago, there was something like 5,000 publicly listed US stocks,
Hmm.
right? Now we're looking at like 3,000. So of the publicly listed stocks in the US, there's fewer of them and they're much larger, right? So we just saw Nvidia, for example, go above the $4 trillion market cap last week.
Hmm.
And so that's sort of also evidence of all this extra interest in the private markets. Now, let's be very clear: the private markets are still massively much smaller
Hmm.
than public markets, right? You mentioned sort of 6 trillion in private equity, which is roughly true. It's the public equity markets are in the sort of $120 trillion range,
Hmm.
right? So still a very small slice of at least the market capitalization of the public equities globally. Other things you're seeing, is sort of like more thematic kind of funds or tech-enabled funds. Anytime you have these these sort of buzzwords, you'll find funds that are trying to capitalize on that. So obviously, be a little wary of those types of funds that are capitalizing on anything AI, tech-enabled, or sort
Right.
of thematic in that regard.
Sure.
Yeah.
The opinions and statements presented on this show are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations. Never make any investment or financial decisions based on information offered on this show without first consulting your financial, legal, or tax advisor. All economic and performance information mentioned on the show is historical in nature and is not indicative of any future results. All indices mentioned on this show are unmanaged and cannot be invested in directly. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy. Lastly, all opinions expressed by Jason Cutitta and any guests on the show are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of or are endorsed by ToBA Financial. For Jason Cutitta, investment advisory services are offered through ToBA Financial LLC, a registered investment advisor offering advisory services in the state of Hawaii and in other jurisdictions where exempt from registration.